Well, welcome everyone to our customer exclusive webinar, a Cyber Prepper's Guide to Incident Response. As you can see, from this, we take this as we take all things cybersecurity very seriously. And we think you're really going to enjoy this webinar. And this is one of your enhanced Cyber Concierge benefits that we're so glad that you're taking advantage of. And I hope you tell others in your organization. Our next webinar for you is in September. The signups will be coming out in just a few weeks. That one's Protecting the Flock, Best Practices for Securing a Virtual or Remote Workforce, which we know is top of mind for many of you. So we really hope that you'll continue to take advantage of these. And of course, as always, we are recording this and we'll send it out to you to forward, to rewatch at your convenience. And hopefully you'll take away some important information from it. And you can always reach us at support@orbitalfire.com if you have any questions. In addition to that, just one more note before we really jump in. You should have all received an email about our customer survey. And we please, it means so much to us. It's really important for us to understand how we can deliver the best cybersecurity services to you, support to you, and as this, kind of extra educational opportunities. And so any feedback that we're able to receive from you just helps us make sure that we're delivering exactly what you want in the way that you want it. And so we hope you'll do that. If you didn't receive it, or if you'd like to get it again, you can just send a note to support to Dana@orbitalfire.com, and I'll make sure I get you that link. And we look forward to hearing what you think. So with that, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. There is a Q&A button below. If you have any questions through this, please add them there. We'll make sure that we respond and answer any questions that you have. And I think that's everything today. Reg Harnish, CEO of OrbitalFire. I think everybody knows Reg has the opportunity to speak to you. If not, he is a well-known cybersecurity expert and thought leader in the field. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dana. Thanks, everyone, for being here for what has really become such a critical part of cybersecurity. Having been in this industry for, I'm going to date myself, maybe going on 20 years, or certainly subject to cybersecurity for about 20 years, this has always been one of those areas that I think draws a lot of attention, tends to be a little bit on the James Bondy sexy side. And I think it's really, unfortunately, misunderstood. But I do remember going back into some of my, younger days, earlier days in cybersecurity. And at that time, really, most of the attention in cyber was due to these major breaches, compromise, intrusions, or incidents. And, the work that I was doing, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, made in one particular case, global news, but certainly national news many, many times. And I got to see at a national level how organizations were preparing for or not preparing for incidents. And it kind of launched a whole, I think, a whole preference and a focus for me on this idea of responding effectively. So a big part of my career has been spent doing this. I have personally responded to hundreds and hundreds of incidents. At one time, this was in 2017 or 2018, I was the incident commander for what was at the time the largest ransomware in US history. And it was a very large health system in Western New York. And we were just lucky enough to get that call. It took about 6 months to do the investigation and the recovery, another 12 months to satisfy regulatory authorities, third parties, legal counsel. And so it was a very in-depth exercise. But again, one more example of how response done well can help an organization and can really become an asset. So why are we doing this? Well, first, again, we're not huge fans of statistics or hype and hysteria. We tend to be very pragmatic and practical. Hopefully all of you feel that from us. But we know that really over the last 2 years or so, 2021 for me was the year that cybercrime went mainstream in a way, in the sense that it had a direct impact on businesses, not just their cash or intellectual property or credit card numbers, but rather their ability to achieve their mission. Also, it had a direct impact on consumers. And so speaking to that here, cybercrime became, commonplace and household because we couldn't get gas due to a cyber attack. And our emergency room was closed. We literally couldn't get healthcare in the place that we wanted because the hospital was hit with some type of incident. And it became life-changing. And at that point, everyone kind of started to accept the fact that cybercrime was just here. And over that, since that time, really, it's only gotten a little bit worse. I would say we are, as an industry, as a society, getting better at cybersecurity and protecting, our assets and managing risk. We are getting better slowly over time. What's happening is, whether it's regulatory complexities and changes, threats and adversaries maturing, AI and tools, becoming automated, the gap between where we need to be and where we are is widening because our adversaries are getting better faster. And that's largely because they're driven by economics, right? And money talks. So this is important because it's everywhere. And again, in terms of the frequency and severity of these things, it's only increasing. Now, again, as I said, we're not huge fans of statistics in this industry. They're spotty, they're sketchy, often just downright wrong. And I'll draw attention to one of the most famous statistics that come out of the cybersecurity industry was 60% of all small businesses that experience a cyber incident go out of business within 6 months, which is nonsense and mathematically impossible. So encourage you to think critically about any of the numbers that you see from this industry. But one thing is for sure, we know it's not getting better. We're only seeing more issues, more severe issues, more frequent issues, and also they are moving downstream. Again, the ability to automate some of these attacks and attack methods has created more opportunity for our adversaries because it costs less to deliver these attacks. And so why not, target smaller organizations? We're not just targeting Boeing and Walmart. We're targeting, 25-person physician practices or, tiny manufacturers. And so it's important to recognize that response is one of the many solutions, but probably the most important to dealing with cybercrime, disruptions, and things like that. What do we see today? Well, ransomware gets most of the headlines, but by far, wire fraud and business email compromise, that's what's injuring small businesses today, and largely the types of incidents that we deal with. We're pretty confident that if an organization trusts us to protect them from ransomware, 99% of the time it's going to work. There are no guarantees, and we would never, promise to eliminate all threats of cybercrime. But what we deal with on probably a monthly and maybe more frequently basis is wire fraud. And whether you are directly impacted because you are the victim and you are experiencing that financial loss, or you're indirectly related to this and you are maybe subject to a lawsuit or scrutiny, or maybe you lost a customer, despite having no involvement in the case itself. And then, of course, business email compromise is incredibly common, and oftentimes it is the first step in wire fraud, but it can also be leveraged and monetized in many other ways. So this is really what we focus on from a response standpoint. Anyone who is building a response plan or capability today, this is really where you should be focusing your energy. Certainly, we know that breach and intrusion and loss of a device, those things are out there and they're happening, but this is really where we see the greatest impact and frequency and damages and losses as well. So The preparation for response comes in a number of different ways, but first we want to set some goals for ourselves. And all of you have heard this, and we preach this constantly to our customers and prospects and anyone that will listen, honestly, about how a cybersecurity program should be developed. There are two goals. The first is defensibility. Now with response, it's a little bit different, but generally speaking, defensibility means if a third party inquires about your cybersecurity program and you tell them what you're doing, they better be satisfied, which means you're doing enough of the right things in the right order to satisfy their requirements or their mandates or their expectations. And it could be a regulatory authority like Health and Human Services. It could be someone in your supply chain like the Department of Defense. It could be your board or peers in your industry. But defensibility is about putting yourself in a defensible position and having a good story to tell about your cybersecurity program, whether it's small and new or it's big and complex and mature, is all based on the kind of organization you have and the third-party expectations that you face. The second is, and where we're going to focus most of our attention today, is resilience. So resilience is about minimizing disruption from undesirable, cyber or computer events such that we are minimizing financial loss, reputational damage, disruption in time, or anything else that could come out of an incident, lawsuits, and the list goes on. So defensibility and resilience should be the core goals of your cybersecurity program in general. But in particular with response, there's a few subtle differences here. Obviously with resilience, that's pretty clear. Response is the mechanism that you will leverage to introduce resilience into your organization. It is the core asset, the core function for resilience. On the defensibility side, there's a little bit of a twist because oftentimes after an incident, your customers, your regulatory authorities, your constituents, could be patients, customers, supply chain, everyone wants to know, what did you do? What happened? What was impacted? Was my data compromised? And so defensibility is often, there's an additional concept here in the sense that the post-incident scrutiny that you might face in an incident becomes very important, and preparing for that and responding and operating during an incident is really important for really developing that defensibility beyond your program, but also to how did you handle the response effort for that incident? We're going to focus on a number of things that are going to make a difference here right now. Let's start with the components of a response capability. There are really four major things. There's lots of little stuff, but really where we want you to focus is in four areas. The first is your plan. This is operational and organic living document that will contain a whole bunch of information about how you as an organization respond to incidents, right? Again, going back to ransomware, wire fraud, those should be things that you're planning for and have, in some cases, step-by-step procedures, but a lot of other details in one place so that when you suspect an event or an incident has occurred, you can grab your plan, and the vast majority of your organization has their marching orders and has the next steps and the goals and things like that in it. I'm going to go into details about what should be in your plan, but that's the number one artifact. It does take some time to develop, although we're going to provide some resources for you at the end. The second is your team. Now, many people can be trained to be decent responders. What I've found is that the best responders are born, they're not made. They're the types of personalities and individuals that love parachuting into problem situations and fixing things and then going back to their daily work. But they are also people who can keep high-level goals in mind, again, defensibility, resilience, and maybe some other things, while doing some very detailed work. This team will be broad. Again, I'm going to go into details and who should be on your team here momentarily, but you need a plan and you need human beings to execute on that plan. The third is tools. Oftentimes, Forensic investigations are required, and because of that, you may need specialized computer software to help you with investigations or to aggregate lots of log and audit information to recreate the crime scene or to analyze and audit whether or not there's been, for example, unauthorized access to an asset. Tools become very important in this process. They're not the only thing, and you can respond without tools. But in some ways, if you're going to meet some of the Department of Justice standards, and particularly for things like evidence collection and preservation, tools become very important. So you should know what you need. I'm going to talk a little bit more about those. And then, of course, where it all comes together is a regular exercise for testing the first three. We call it an incident response tabletop. You can call it whatever you want, but essentially what that means is taking the plan, giving it to the team along with the tools, and simulating your ability to respond to a likely incident. Now, you do this in a controlled, safe manner, and I'll talk a little bit more about what's important there. But the tabletop is the opportunity for you to exercise the first three components to make sure that you're prepared. Another benefit of the tabletop is it starts to create muscle memory, right? It's one thing to shoot baskets, but that doesn't make you a good basketball player. It's another thing entirely to watch basketball. That doesn't make you a good basketball player. But if you can watch it, play it, or practice it, and then play, well, that's where muscle memory and skills and success come from. So let's dig into each one of these. So let's start with the plan. This doesn't have to be a Bible, but it does need to hit on some very important things. The first is this: you need to, or we strongly encourage you to adopt a standard like NIST, and maybe in addition to the ICS. So the NIST SP 800-61, that is a globally accepted framework and standard. It's open source, it's free, and it defines how, well, it really defines all of the different activities, roles and responsibilities, and what I'll call intermediate goals for incident response. It's going to repeat a lot of the things that I'm talking about here today, but it's all in one place. If you're looking to become an expert in the response process, if you're looking to develop a plan, this is the document that I would start with, and you can download it for free. It's not exactly light reading, might be a cure for insomnia for some of you, but it is definitely a well-organized collection of response and plan development resources. So highly encourage that you start there. The incident command system is actually something that was developed by FEMA, and it's called the ICS 100. It's essentially the dummy's guide to hierarchical crisis management. And if you can combine NIST 61 with the ICS 100, which this is how we operate on all of our incidents, you've got a really strong foundation of standards that are highly adopted, really well understood, and have a lot of support in the industry. The next thing that goes into your plan is your roster. Who are your people? Who is your team? And then we think about this in a couple of different ways. I don't want to steal my own thunder, so I'm going to talk about the team next, but there should be a contact list with everyone who has a role and responsibility in the response process. Keep in mind that some of these may be third parties and they may not be employees. Roles and responsibilities. Now that you've identified the individuals who will be either responding to an incident or managing the response to an incident, or a third party, what do you expect of them? What is their role, and what are their responsibilities in this process? Depending on the incident type, wire fraud versus ransomware, I mean, those response cases and activities look very, very, in fact, they couldn't look more different. And so the players that exercise those roles and responsibilities will be different in each response type. But you should be defining that, because if I'm named in the response plan, I need to know what does the organization expect of me. Now, there's a big, big section on all of the other considerations. We call them guidelines, but things that you should be considering as we look across the different types of incidents that could occur at your organization. Here are some examples. Law enforcement. When do we contact the FBI? Or do we contact law enforcement? Maybe we just have prohibited that activity, or maybe we've mandated it. The state police, When do we notify constituents? And that could be we notify our employees, our affected patients, customers, or supply chain partners. When are we notifying them? If we are notifying them at all, what do we say? When do we say it? Who do we say it to? That kind of thing. So communication's critically important. Reporting to regulatory authorities or commercial oversight. So if you have had a compromise of credit card information, there are mandates and requirements, contractual requirements for you as it relates to reporting to the Payment Card Industry Council. Every industry has its own reporting mechanism. Most states have their own breach reporting notification. So if you've had a compromise of sensitive or otherwise classified or regulated information, most states today require that you report to the Attorney General and some other things. And these are just a few, but there's a whole bunch of third-party or peripheral areas and concepts and topics that you should be considering and including in your response plan. And then the last and one of the most important during response is what we call playbooks. These are not necessarily step-by-step, but rather time-boxed activities that you need to be considering and perhaps performing depending on the incident type. So for example, in wire fraud, the very first thing you should be doing is contacting your bank, notifying of the fraudulent activity, and attempting to claw back those monies that may have been transferred or wired fraudulently. And there might be things that we want you to do immediately. There might be some that need to be done in the first hour or in the first day. And some of them are considerations. But that playbook gives you sort of, because incident response is not step-by-step, it's very fluid, a step-by-step procedure doesn't really work. So you want to be thinking about this in terms of time frame. What do we do immediately? What do we do continuously? Or we even think about this as what are things that we should only do if necessary? Because it tends to be very chaotic and emotional and dynamic. And so we want to be able to save time. But these playbooks give us that framework for operating. So when you're in a response scenario, you have somewhere to go that no matter what incident, if they're well done, you won't forget anything. Your checklist is there, your timing is there, your logistics are there, and in some cases, even your roles and who on your team will be doing these things. Okay, let's talk about the team. The first is your incident commander. Generally, an individual plus a deputy, if that commander is unavailable, that centralize all activity, coordinate, orchestrate all response activities. So, for example, going back to that case with the major health system in Western New York, the FBI for about 6 months, they were reporting to me because I was the incident commander there. Microsoft, they reported to me, meaning Microsoft didn't do anything unless I knew about it. And we were able to talk about it as a team, approve that move or that activity, and then go back to Microsoft and say, okay, listen, we're good here. And so it's important because you need to have one centralized place for all of the latest, most up-to-date, accurate, and complete information. You also need someone to direct activities. And so generally speaking, it's a bit of hub and spoke during response, where the commander, because they are experienced and know how to handle this kind of event, they are directing traffic for all parties, third parties, internal parties, response or management, decision makers or hands-on resources, everything. And that's a busy job. And someone, you want someone in that role who is really good at managing crises, is very unflappable, calm under pressure, non-emotional, that can handle a lot of different things, good juggler. They are the central core of response. The next is your response team, your incident response team. These are the hands-on folks, people that might be taking forensic images or writing press releases or working directly with, Department of Financial Services on reporting. So they're the people who are in the trenches, working on specific tasks in their domain. They're identified in the plan, and they have specific roles and responsibilities. The counterpart to that is the incident management team. This tends to be a lot smaller than the response team, and it tends to be more leadership, could be fiduciaries, board members, executives, managers, things like that, where they're making decisions. So the response team tend to be doing things. The incident management team is evaluating those things, and the commander is kind of right in the middle of that hub and spoke. And the commander is communicating to both parties and translating, because oftentimes, the fact that we were able to capture a forensically sound image on a salted password hash to determine the likelihood and conclusion around a brute force on a password hash, like, okay, great, we need that. But the incident management team may have no idea what that means. So you need a commander who can speak all those languages. Next is becoming very common. This is your cyber insurance breach coach. In most of your policies, you'll find that there is a mandate for you to involve. So basically contact and involve your breach coach, who will be assigned to you during a incident, but what they call a claim. And the breach coach's job is it's a little sketchy, honestly, and I'm going to be real transparent here. We hope that the breach coach is there to help minimize losses for the insured. But what we often see is, maybe they're doing that, but they're also trying to minimize the likelihood of, let me use better words. They are also there in trying to right size the decision on whether or not the carrier pays that claim and how much they might pay. So they're assessing not just the incident itself, but certainly the damage, the exposure, the potential residual risk. What do the damages actually look like in terms of financial terms, liability? And the breach coach is kind of central to that. But their job, of course, is to report back and work with the insurance carrier on the claim itself. Your general counsel plays an important role. And in most cases, we really encourage, if not urge, our customers, if they ever experience an incident, to engage counsel in this process so that there's privilege on the findings, right? So we want this to be a protected, non-discoverable or publicly discoverable activity, because once you declare an incident, there's likely to be more scrutiny. You're likely to get questions from your third parties, your customers, patients, regulatory authorities, the media. And additionally, you may have liability. You may be facing some kind of litigation. So we want to make sure that counsel is involved to evaluate this in many cases. If we are your response team, and in most cases we already are, we're going to urge you to get them involved early so that we can work directly with them, so that we can deliver documentation and findings to them, so that all of those assets are under privilege. And then the last part is third parties. We're going to be working potentially with a lot of third parties. Most of you are outsourcing your information technology. Maybe you don't have general counsel. You have an attorney on retainer, maybe a crisis communications firm. There's a whole bunch of other conditions and considerations here. And so your team is not just employees, and it's not just your cybersecurity experts. It is a whole bunch of, the grander team is comprised of a lot of different individuals with different subject matter expertise. The next is tools. I'm going to throw all these up here because I think, honestly, some of these may be unnecessary for you. However, if you are building your own incident response capability and your own team and your own plan, there are some things that you want to make sure that you have. We suggest considering something like a go bag or a Pelican case where all of your response stuff is, including maybe like a couple of laptops, power strips, extra batteries, prepaid payment cards if you have people who are traveling, things like that. But certainly secure storage is important, because we want to make sure that any evidence that is collected is preserved correctly. And that's the next one, which is chain of custody containers. And that could be Faraday bags or other things. Forensic imaging software and tools could be a laptop, could be write protectors for hard drives. That's a pretty specific science in itself. Extra storage around, because we're going to be gathering lots of information. Honestly, I've been on so many incidents that you would be blown away at some of the things that were just like, man, if we just had duct tape right now, that would solve this problem. And I am not kidding. I mean, duct tape has saved us many, many times. But there are a lot of little things that kind of go into this, especially if you have a response team that you're building out of employees that might be traveling to different locations. You want everything in one place, and you want them to have everything that they need to certainly respond to the incident, but also respond to it, what we call out of bounds, which means not on your network. We don't want their work discoverable. We don't want them essentially trampling on a crime scene. We don't want the work that they do to impact our response, the efficacy of our response, and there's a bunch of other reasons. Another thing that's really common: jetpacks or mobile access points, and the list goes on. And so if you're building your own go bag with all of your response tools, we have a whole separate webinar that we do, and I believe the recording may be on our website, but certainly we can share that with you about all the things that you should be putting in that go bag. Then the last is your tabletop. So the first is, how often should you be doing tabletops? You should have a schedule. Generally, annually is what is required by any mandate. More than that, not necessary. Some organizations, however, that we're working with are doing it twice per year because maybe they have a little more complexity in their organization, or maybe they're more highly targeted or frequently targeted, or maybe they just are less risk tolerant. They cannot withstand any kind of disruption or loss or reputational damage. And so a schedule is really important. Think about that, but generally recommend once per year. You want to be thinking about scenarios. I mentioned the most common types of incidents, but you want to make sure that you're personalizing it. You want to look at that list and say, hey, does this apply to us? Maybe we're more susceptible to breach, or we're more likely to experience unauthorized access to medical records, or financial accounts, things like that. So what type of practice do you want to exercise, right? What should your scenarios look like? These are your simulations and your opportunity to test your organization's response capability. You need a moderator, someone that understands the response process, pretty much has your incident response plan memorized, knows everyone on your team, or at least who to contact, and someone that can, in these simulations, keep the conversation flowing so that everyone is participating and that you're meeting the goals of your tabletop, which, by the way, the goal is to improve the to improve the plan and the team. That's really the goal of that tabletop. There's usually a mole or two, generally one, but it's someone who works with the moderator and the incident response facilitators and developing the scenarios. So the mole's job is to provide technical details such that the simulated scenarios feel very realistic. Now, the mole generally does not participate in the tabletop. And so if this is something you're developing yourself, try to rotate those individuals so it's not one person doing it all the time. Also, you don't want your key people, your key response members as a mole, because they are automatically excluded from the tabletop itself. So you don't want to do that. And then plan updates. As I mentioned, the whole goal for this is to improve the plan and to improve the team. So things that commonly come out of a tabletop exercise are changes in language. Maybe there's complete omissions, something that you completely forgot in your plan. Maybe we require training on a team, or maybe we need different resources. Let's say something that just came out of a recent tabletop was not just a call tree, but a service that once you kick off that, essentially that alert, that emergency message, it automatically scrolls through all of your response team and management team members to notify that we have activated the incident response plan and you are now essentially activated and you're on call. So anything could come out of these simulations. You want to capture as much as possible, but the tabletop, that's your verification that your capability is maturing or is effective, right? So having a plan is great, but if you don't have anyone to execute, it's worthless. Having a great experienced team with lots of institutional knowledge and experience is great, but it's not very effective if they don't have a plan. Having your tools are great, but I mean, hammers don't build houses. And then, so having the tabletop gives you the ability to put all of those things together and really test all of that. Okay, a couple of final thoughts, and there's a bunch here because response, again, is a really well misunderstood function. And most companies and organizations that we see tend to just flock to the technology aspects of this. Can we restore from a backup? Can we re-image machines as quickly as possible? Can we get our EHR or our financial system or our, it could be anything, operationally? Can we get access to those things again? You're not thinking about, hey, do we have a Bitcoin wallet? How do we negotiate with these adversaries? When do we contact our special agent? Like, those things are almost never considered unless you've gone through a process like this. So, the first thing that we wanted to really strongly stress is that this is not a technology or a technical function. Your IT team can only do about 10% of this. Now, again, depending on the incident type, wire fraud versus ransomware, in a wire fraud case, your IT team may not be necessary at all, literally not for a minute. But in a ransomware case, they may be necessary for a much more significant period of time. And so it will fluctuate. But if you think that your IT team has got this, I promise you, they don't got this. Not only that, it's not a technology. They should not be accountable for a response. This is a business function. And so that incident management team ultimately takes responsibility for your capability, or maybe you have a chief information security officer or a HIPAA security officer. And so you should be thinking about, what does this look like? And as part of your communications and education process around this, let's start to spread the word, because your accountant or controller may be way busier during a response case than your IT team. And so just keep that in mind, that this is not a technology responsibility. It's not a technology function. During your plan development and in your playbooks, you want to have an inflection point in the response process that says a simple question: do we think that litigation is possible? Because if you say no, we do not think, or we are confident that we are not engaging in litigation and that we will not be engaged in litigation, because at that point we can start to, I won't call it cutting corners, but expediting certain process by streamlining a few things. Because if we're not worried about post-incident scrutiny, if we're not worried about regulatory reporting, if we're not necessarily worried about what our customers, patients, supply chain partners may think of our response, then we can move more quickly. If litigation is possible, you want to make sure that you're really crossing your T's, dotting your I's, following your own process. That's one of the first questions you might get is, hey, I see that you have a plan. Did you follow it? And show me proof that you followed your own plan and playbooks. If litigation is possible, you want to make sure that you're leveraging all of these standards, that you are taking your time where necessary, preserving evidence properly, documenting everything you do, so that if and when you are faced with those activities, that you have everything that you need. Really tricky. We encourage everyone to consider a cyber insurance policy. There's a lot of potential benefit to having one. Now, most organizations, before we get engaged, they're either underinsured or overinsured at times, and they haven't identified their residual risk, so it's impossible for them to align their policy, and thusly their premium, with coverages that they actually need. So here are some of the implications. One is, once you have a cyber insurance policy, you're going to have a little boss who is keenly interested in not paying your claim, making some decisions for you. So when that breach coach gets involved early on, they may say, hey, listen, you need to do this, or you need to produce this report, or we think this is a priority. And what happens is, particularly at small business, they're concerned that their claim is not going to be paid. And so they just follow the breach codes to the letter. And oftentimes that can drag them off what's really good for the organization overall or long term. So the breach coach is really thinking short term and what's the context of this claim and what is the likelihood that we are paying this insured for on this claim. But there are other implications as well. Once you declare an incident, if you have a cyber insurance policy, believe me, next year, when you go to renew, you're going to be asked again, have you had any incidents in the last 12 months? At that point, ethically, you need to say yes. And I can promise you that that's not going to have a zero impact on your premium or your insurability. Meaning today there's sort of two dials. How much coverage can I get? And what is it going to cost me to get that coverage? What's happening with small businesses is they are becoming less and less insurable, or the retentions are going up. But also what we're seeing on average is something like anywhere from 2x to 5x the premium for less coverage. So understand that once you have a policy, there are implications. You really need to understand that. And at times it requires, let's say you've got a risk officer or someone who is handling other insurance types like liability, errors and omissions or other things. So you want to be thinking about insurance globally, but also how it affects the response process and your ability to respond in the way that you really want to. So, I mean, one of the greatest cybersecurity coaches of all time, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Super important that we see organizations investing a lot of time, money, and energy in a response capability, still learning things in the process. And you have to go into this with a mindset that this will never be perfect, but you cannot let perfect be the enemy of good. Okay, so you want to think about playbooks, train your team, tabletop once a year, update your plan. These are all really important things. And I promise you, if you're doing these well, it will reduce your damage over time. It will improve your resiliency and your defensibility. I promise you that. I have seen it hundreds of times, but you're not going to anticipate everything. And so no different than any other boxing match. This is one where instinct, I talked a little bit about this in the beginning, where I feel like the best responders are born. So a little bit of instinct, a lot of luck, but preparation that's really kind of the secret formula to effective response. So be thinking about those things and setting expectations across the organization or with your audit committee or your board or with your constituents that, of course, we take this seriously. And here are all the things that we have done, including engaging third-party experts, building a plan, tabletopping, et cetera, but you're not going to be perfect. And I've never seen an incident just go completely smoothly without any hiccups or without any light bulbs going off. And here he is again. When we talk about resilience, I think Mike Tyson sums it up best here, right? The best boxers in history, they're not the ones that could take the ones that could throw the hardest punch, the ones that could take the hardest punch. And resilience is about taking hard punches. We have over the last year, probably about half a dozen times out of all of our customers dealt with wire fraud. In some cases, it was just an indirect impact. They had not lost any money. However, it was real questionable if they had partners that they would be willing to work with again because they had lost money. And now they were being accused of mishandling or being involved when truly our customer could not have done anything to affect the outcome of that case. But we've also had one or two incidents where our customer was directly affected. Money lost, disruption, opportunity cost, time, reputation, potential reputational issues, legal issues. And so this is really about accepting the fact that cybercrime is in your future. There's just no way to avoid all of it. But there is absolutely a capability that you or we can build that will help minimize the impact of any types of incidents that you are most likely to experience. My last thought is, this is a customer, most of you, if not all of you today, are already customers. Maybe you are engaging us for, developing your response capability, doing tabletops, building the plan, training your team. We might be doing all of that for you already. If we're not, you may want to consider that. Certainly something we'd love to talk to you about. It doesn't help us to have a customer, experiencing an incident. It doesn't look good for us either. So we're in the business of protecting our customers, and we've got skin in this game. And so if you feel it's necessary or desirable, let us help. There are things that we can do. Everything I've mentioned in this entire presentation are things that we are doing for many of our customers today. For some, their response plan, or at least their internal response activation plan, is just call OrbitalFire. And of course, for our customers, whether we're helping you build a response capability or not, please make us your first call. Don't call your attorney. Don't call your insurance carrier. Don't call your IT team. We know how and what they should be doing. Let us coordinate that work for you and help you reduce and potentially eliminate a lot of headaches and loss and frustration in this process. Again, some of us have seen literally hundreds and hundreds, some of the biggest, most high-profile incidents in this country's history we have worked on. So let us help if we can. At that point, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Would love to take any questions, whether it's about response or any of the other aspects, building a capability, your team, some of the other things that we may have seen ourselves. If you're interested about how some of these incidents went down and what the impact was, or maybe how they operated, or what our responsibility was, would love to answer any questions that you might have. You're on mute, Dana. Finally, I get to say it.
Just use the Q&A button below if anybody has any questions. And I know somebody asked about the building a go bag webinar that we've done in the past. When we send out this recording, we will make sure we get you information on that. But anything else? Please take advantage of having Reg here, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
If you haven't been through it, and hopefully most of you have not, it may be hard to envision what it feels like. And I think the quicker you can get through, building some of these components and don't expect your tabletop to be perfect either. Getting through some of this and just practicing, I think what you'll find is generally you have heroes, you have people that are super knowledgeable and really passionate about your mission, and they want to help, and they're really good at their jobs. And so they have all the raw materials to do this, but they may not be organized well, or they may not have the right tools to affect, or expedite the response process. But I think your team would love to do this. When, we've done it with small organizations, we've done it with huge organizations. Everyone walks out of there like, wow, that was awesome. My eyes are open. I learned a lot, and I feel more capable. If this happened to us tomorrow, we would be far more prepared to deal with that. And so it's not just fun and exciting and educational. It really can be very productive if done well. Any questions? Anything we can answer? We always hate when there's no questions, of course. Maybe we did a good job explaining this process, or maybe you're just going to email us later. That's fine too. We don't want to put anyone on the spot, but please, just throw my information up here. You can certainly contact us at support@OrbitalFire, even if you're not a current customer, but certainly feel free to contact me. Happy to answer any questions, even if—
We actually just got a question in,
Okay.
Reg. Somebody asked, cyber insurance is a bear. What is or is not covered seems very subjective. And I know we've talked about this a lot. Have you heard of Cork, and or do you have any experience with what they offer to MSPs to drive down costs?
I am not familiar with Cork, but that said, there is a whole generation of what we call sort of insured tech 2.0s who are out there, and whether they're focused on the actuarial science of cybercrime, because I mean, the reality is that when the big carriers got in, AIG, Chubb, Lloyd's, Beasley, like they treated cybercrime the same way that they treat a tornado. So they took a bath. They lost millions and millions of dollars. But there's a next sort of new generation of organizations who understand cybercrime a little bit differently. And they're doing a better job of tying your cybersecurity program directly to your premium and your residual risk and your insurability. So we're excited about that. It's not a panacea. We have a lot of work to do, but it is getting better. We'll definitely look into, thank you, Rob. We'll look into Cork, and I'll get back to you separately on that.
Thank you for that question. Anybody else have any other questions? Have you gone through a tabletop? Have you, kind of what were your experiences even with it? Did you find it helpful? Or anything else that we can help as you kind of wrap your head around how to start to incorporate this in your organization? Well, Reg said he's got his information up. If anybody has any questions, you can reach out to support. You can reach out to Reg. And as I hope you all know, we are always here. Oh, so Rob, thank you for all this. We got it.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate
it. Please, anytime, please reach out. We are always here for you. And we really hope that you'll attend our next webinar. We'll be putting that out soon so we can get it on your calendars. And again, my last pitch for our customer insights survey, please fill it out. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. And we really look forward to hearing what's on your mind.
Thank you. And thanks for spending some time with us. We'll talk to everyone soon.